Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Özge Ersoy. I'm the Public Programs Lead at Asia Art Archive in Hong Kong, and I'll be moderating today's talk with Noor Abed, Lara Khaldi, and Ahmet Öğüt. Before I introduce our speakers, I want to say a couple of words about Life Lessons, the talk series that this event is part of. We started Life Lessons in the spring of 2020, and so far we have hosted more than 20 artists who have really inspired and informed the way that we think about education. And each session, our speakers talked about the unique models that they have developed in universities, in art academies, in museums, in cultural organizations, for collectives, and also for self-organized schools. And overall, I must say that this series is part of Asia Art Archive's ongoing research about art pedagogy. And for us, it's important to do research about the role of artists in developing new models in education, and also to study both historical and contemporary models and think how they influence each other. It's also an extension of our understanding of archives as not as static depositories of materials, but as sites for knowledge sharing. So we try to constantly ask ourselves how we can further support and think with people who are really dedicated to these questions. And we are very, very grateful for this ongoing conversation. Today is the final session in this series, and on behalf of our team, I would like to thank the SHO Foundation Limited and CK and KHO Foundation for their continuous support for this program since it started 2 years ago. So as I said, today I'm with three speakers, three people that I admire, who initiated self-organized schools. We have Noor Abed and Lara Khaldi, who co-founded the School of Intrusions in Ramallah in Palestine in 2019. The School of Intrusions is an educational platform, and it uses peer-led seminars. They don't have a tuition fee. They don't have a permanent space, and they hold seminars on the street, in farms, in cemeteries, and also in cultural institutions, among the other places. So in a way, they temporarily intrude into these public and private spaces. And we'll talk more about where the idea of intrusion comes from and how it enables the participants to engage with issues of collectivity and alternative knowledge economies. We also have Ahmet Öğüt, who initiated the Silent University in 2012. Ahmet and we have known each other for a long time, and I've been very lucky to be able to follow how this initiative has grown over the last decade. And very briefly, this is a knowledge exchange platform. And the most important part about the Silent University is that it's run by displaced people and forced migrants who are not able to use their skills and their training because of migration laws or other bureaucratic obstacles. And the Silent University started in the UK, and over the past 10 years, they have had platforms in several countries, including Germany, Sweden, Jordan, Greece, and Denmark. And today we'll speak more about how the Silent University has adapted itself to the local urgencies in these different places. And for me, the common point between these two self-organized schools is that they are conceived as a form of intervention. They really go beyond arts education, and I think it's fair to say that they address issues of social justice. In other words, the way that they are organized, it really responds to issues of distribution of opportunities and distribution of privileges as well. So in a way, the school itself becomes a political tool. And I'm very much aware that these are very big words that I'm using right now. And I think we'll do our best to unpack them together in the next hour, because both of these projects, they've been engaged with these ideas for a long time. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing from all of you guys. So Noor, Lara, and Ahmed, thank you so much for accepting our invitation. And I want to start by asking you what prompted you, what motivated you to initiate these schools. And I'm especially curious about your own educational backgrounds. So I want to ask you, what were the things that you struggled with when you were a student? And what were the things that you really wanted to change when you were at school? And Noor, let's start with you. For you, what were the pressing questions as an art student? And how did you start thinking about a model like the School of Intrusions after that?
Thank you, Özge, for hosting us, and I'm very happy to be here. So in relation to my own educational background, I can mention maybe 3 points. First, I studied at the International Academy of Art in Palestine, which was a 10 years project that now has moved to a bigger structure of Birzeit University into an art department like any other university. And the model of that academy was based on workshops, seminars. It was more informal. We could choose or like vote for who we want to, you know, teach us, or, you know, so it was more informal way of education. It was really in the center of the city, so we were so close to the streets. And this gave me a lot of insight to really start my performance practice in the streets of Ramallah, or like the public was always also very close. So this is a model. And after that, I went to the US to do my master's in Los Angeles, and then I went to the Whitney program in New York. The Whitney program, I think, was the first starting point for me to think of to start my own platform, because the Whitney was a great model of thinking of Marxist culture theory, which I'm interested in. But of course, it's always the Western way of doing it, which was really good and amazing to study 1 year of Marxist theory. But every time I would visit Palestine, I would feel like I don't know how to execute or apply these theories in a region or a culture that is not necessarily that did not go through the same timeline somehow, where communality is integrated more into that culture. So this was also something that kept me thinking. And then I returned to Palestine and I started to teach at Birzeit University, where like my own academy moved to that, and I realized the difference also. So teaching my students in Birzeit, which is a continuation of the academy, but changed so much, which became more formal, grades, evaluations. Like I was finding ways to erase all the exams or to deal with them in a different way, to take them back to the city, because the university was away from the city. So I would try to hold my seminars in like the street again, or cultural institutions to be more close. So all these points were helpful for me to start, you know, another alternative way, you know, platform of education.
And Lara, maybe we can continue with you and your backgrounds. You participated in a curatorial program and a graduate program in philosophy and cultural theory. And I also know that you've been teaching art and theory in universities in Ramallah, Bethlehem, and Jerusalem. With you, we can maybe continue where Noor left off, and also think about both your background as a student, but also your experience as an educator.
Yes, thank you, Özge. Thank you for inviting us. It's really nice to be here with all of you. Yeah, I want to go back a little bit even earlier education. because there is a very special experience in radical education in Palestine. So when I was in primary school, during the first Intifada, which lasted from 87 to 92, the schools were closed by the Israeli military occupation forces. They imposed an indefinite closure on schools and universities, which lasted about a couple of years. So the schools were closed for 2 years, and parents had to figure out, much like, you know, the pandemic situation, parents had to figure out what to do. The amazing part was that, you know, the first Intifada in Palestine was not only, it was a popular uprising, a political uprising, but it was also an uprising in terms of also education, theater, arts, and literature. So it was because of the political organization, and so there were mostly left-wing parties leading the first Intifada at the time. They were organized in what they called popular neighborhood committees. And these neighborhood committees, I remember in our neighborhood, we were we lived near the center of the city, near this, where, you know, the photo in my background. And there were many teachers in the neighborhood. So the committee would locate all the teachers in the neighborhood and then send the kids of different ages to the different teachers. But of course, the teachers had to come up with different ways of educating as well. And because they were teachers in the different schools, it was their opportunity to not teach the curriculum, to try out different things, because it was also, everyone was politicized. And so land was extremely important, folklore. So instead of, again, teaching the curriculum, which it was an opportunity to try out different things. So the whole society became a field of experimentation in non-formal and informal community education. So this was an experience that I think informed a whole generation. So later on at school, this changed also, those 2 years changed the way that teachers also taught at schools when we went back to schools. So I think I had an education which was completely self-reflective upon itself. So, and then later on, with more formal education, I think it's the usual story. We all have, you know, we face problems with it, but in particular, in terms of also overlapping with Noor's experience. I taught at the academy, at the International Academy of Art. And it, again, it is a really interesting experiment that lasted for 10 years. And unfortunately, it had to integrate within the more classical institution of Birzeit University. I mean, and in terms of teaching there at the International Academy of Art, it didn't, of course, it was really based on peer learning as well. So you had students from different ages. You had students who were 50 years old who decided to go back and study art. And then you had fresh graduates from school. So it was an extremely rich context of peer learning. So I felt like I kind of fit right in, not as a teacher. The situation of a teacher-student relationship was not there from the beginning because of this different generations studying together. So everyone was learning from each other. And of course, with, you know, what Noor mentioned, being in the center of the city. So the city was the material, public space was the material to work with. And then it moved into a campus, which is the nearby village of Birzeit, but it's in a campus which is away from the village and a particular context of a classical university. And so I saw this quite a shift, a huge shift in how the program could be or was, and then how it, once it integrated into a classical education system, what it did to it, right? And what it enforced upon us as teachers and the students as well. So School of Intrusions, I think, grew out of this very experience of local experience of living in Palestine, and this particular experience of the Art Academy and Birzeit University. So we thought a lot about going back to the city and being in the city, and the city as material for thought. Yeah, I maybe we continue later. So
I mean, I think it's great to hear more about your previous experiences and engagements with these educational institutions and cultural institutions, because with the School of Intrusions, you don't necessarily stop working with them, but there are different types of engagements that we're talking about, and we'll definitely come back to that. And Ahmet, let's continue with you. I know that your educational background is in the arts. You studied in Turkey. And similar to Noor and Lara, you've been also teaching, well, for a long time now. You've been a guest mentor, guest professor, advisor, research teacher. So you play these different roles in educational institutions. So tell us about your own educational background, and how the urgency to start the Silent University came about.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that we start from this angle, because I normally don't get to have time to talk about where I come from in terms of education, and to arrive to such, platform and initiative and such art practice, this kind of art practice. I'm just continuing over like now. I think it's pretty much like 20 years almost actively. So, but there is also pre-period of this 20 years, like it starts already in, middle school and high school very much. So my hometown is the Kurdish populated area of Turkey, and my native language was banned in 90s. So it was not a language to speak in public space on the streets. That's why my parents were very conscious about it, and they didn't teach us or native language. So the only way to have education, it was state schools, and it was also in Turkish. So I was educated in the secondary language that was assimilating my native language. So I'm fully educated in Turkish. Beside that, also in my area, teachers were paid double because it was war zone. So if people want to go there, doctors, peoples, and like police and military personnel, if they go to that area, they are paid double, because it was considered, basically a state of emergency for many years. It was a state of emergency area. It was conflict and war area. And for any kind of services, people were offered to be able to have courage to go there. So I was studied there, and I knew that there was not big chances to have good education, because like most people, teachers, they were either afraid to come, so there was not enough teachers, or if they come, there's still like you need some sort of private support to enter the higher education. So for higher education, there was something quite interesting happening at the time, also which I went through that way as well. I was at the fine arts high school, which was completely a new thing, and it was a state school, but it was like not known at all. So I had this clear idea that to become a painter early on, which I never became one. So early on, but I did study painting like in high school, at the university years as well, later in Ankara, for 8 years. So my artistic journey started like that. So having education in a very traditional, classical, even like I would say, like even in a very like Soviet sense and early modernist sense, painting education. But it was very political. So to study painting was the way to get out, or the way to get higher education. So I remember already in high school, I was teaching people who are 10 years older than me to enter I was teaching how to make drawings. to people who were entering the university while I was still starting my high school. And that was a way for many people who didn't have the finances to go to these private schools to prepare for other departments, but they could do like 3-month summer course to learn how to make drawings, and they could enter university, so I get university level education, and they later all became painting teachers. So they all had higher education, and only because of the summer courses we were doing. And that was a really way to go to university for people who are like lower income or this kind of war conflict area, which was deliberate strategy by the government to keep the education level low in that area. So that was kind of like a little bit of a sabotage to the situation, intervention to the situation, that we all went to university. Like all my siblings, we all went to university, all my friends, and most of them even became teachers in many different primary schools and so on. So they could then, there's less need of people coming from the west part of the country, but they would just teach. So this was like naturally happening, and kind of like a strategic tool to get out of the war zone and get yourself educated in higher education institutions. So I was still stuck in this traditional way of education, where I was going like trying to become a painter at the times, because there was no museums or no outside institutions to get the information, like especially like something like contemporary art did not exist. Even I moved to more west, like I moved to Ankara, the capital, and there was no museum yet when I was studying there. And to see first contemporary art exhibition, I was already second or third year at university. So it took time. And then quickly after that, I moved to Istanbul. I started going to Istanbul. And I remember taking part in this like very, very first museum ever in Turkey, contemporary art museum at the time. And I was lucky enough to be there, like be part of the generation that, happened to be in those shows, like completely purely coincidence it was. So this grew internally inside the country, while my international, like I became a research assistant while I was doing my master's degree in Istanbul. So finally these things started happening in a more rather international part of the country. Istanbul was international because of the biennial, because of the very first residency program starting and bringing Western artists to the town and making it slightly more international than just 1 week visits. Like there were people around speaking English, coming from like Eastern Europe or Western Europe, or even from United States, staying in Istanbul a year or two. So this was really important. And after that, I moved to Amsterdam, and then that was the moment, first time I became full-time artist without a secondary job, even as an academic. So I left after master degree. I didn't continue my PhD degree. I didn't think I need the academy that didn't understand that me going to an international residency program is a contribution to the heritage of learning. Me learning things they didn't relate, they thought I'm going to some artist holiday or something. So I realized, okay, this is not the academy I want to be in. So I quit that kind of academy. I was expected to do a PhD and so on. So I got into more academic world through the radical pedagogy, through the independent modality, platforms, and being as a guest, as you say, and I'm still a guest. Not that particularly I want that, but any academy engage with me, they need to transform. So they rather have me as a guest for now. So when this change, we need to transform together. So this is what we do also with Silent University, which I will tell more about in a minute.
Thanks for that, Ahmet. And maybe here we can start thinking about and talking about how these schools have evolved since they started, because you've been speaking about what motivated you to make that decision to initiate these schools. And for you, for instance, Ahmet, in your case, the Silent University is now 10 years old. And you had schools or platforms in many different countries. Some of them have had a longer time span compared to the others. Some of them have this large-scale institutional support, and some others, they've been led by much smaller initiatives. And I'm aware that each format responds to the city where it's based, right? And perhaps we can take a moment to think about the challenges that you've had. And because, you know, when I say how these schools have evolved, it's not necessarily in terms of the progress, but I would really, really appreciate it if you could talk about what worked, what didn't work in the way that you imagined it when you first started it. Maybe also like the points of friction among the participants, which you had to discuss and negotiate over time. It would be great to hear about what has been happening and these major points of friction over the last 10 years. Maybe we can continue with that.
Do you want me to continue now?
Yes, yeah, sure.
Because I just talk quite a lot.
Sure, why not? We'll go back to Lara and Noor in a minute.
Okay.
Or do you want to take a break? I can also ask the question to Lara and Noor if you like.
Yeah, I think let's start with Noor and Lara, their journey, and I will continue after.
Okay, sure. So Noor and Lara, I think you know, picking up on that idea of the locality and responding to the city, maybe this is where we can start talking about, because the School of Intrusions, it started in Ramallah in 2019. And as both of you talked about it, it's very much rooted in the educational issues and in the political issues in Palestine. And I know recently, for instance, there was a session in Athens in Greece. And maybe we can speak about how your motivations, your ideals, your thoughts have translated into a different place, and how that really makes you think about the format and the model that you have developed so far.
Maybe I can start, and Lara, we can speak together. Okay. But I would like to start with I don't know if I would call it a challenge or urgency at the same time, because when we were discussing, Lara and I, before we started, I think we were interested in the current social political moment in Palestine, in Ramallah, the city where we both lived in back then, and the post-Oslo situation, which means like there is a state of, we thought about it as this like illusion of the post-colonial, while you are still under direct colonialism, and the flood of economy or the money, like in relation to direct colonialism. So there is this like new liberal and colonial together, merging together, creating this state of the illusion of the post-colonial, as if the city is, you know, we witnessed a lot of changes in terms of cultural institutions, more privatized sites, the streets are changing, you know, these changes were, and for me at least, like really a starting point of how do we think, of course, alongside the educational changes as well, and how they are also becoming more formalized. So this is the first urgency, and we thought about it to create not yet another institution, but a platform that we can create a community or a collective that goes on and on, rather than an institution or a space that will become an institution. So we were also critical of that. This is the main maybe challenge. And then of course, when we did it, it was important for us that we do an introductory meeting with the public before we start. So also how not to impose our own ideas or theories on a city or a community, but rather start together. So we built our own structure and points, but we did an introductory meeting for public, where a lot of also different generations came. My father was there with us, for example, for the whole session, which I found interesting. That's completely different background. And from this meeting, we revised our structure, and then we started. So we were trying to be aware of, you know, the things we did not like in the institutions we've been through, and how to start an alternative kind of platform where we were, how to say it, we were thinking of all the challenges we faced before somehow. Lara, do you want to jump in? Then maybe I can continue.
May I follow up with a very quick question, Noor? When you are speaking about the participants, because you said that there was this first meeting and then you kept developing the model. I'm also curious about how you reached out to these like-minded people who would want to become your participants. If you can also say a couple of words about that, that would be, then we can go through that.
This introductory meeting was really open to public. It's not necessarily to whoever want to apply. It was really like Lara and I wanted to share our thoughts and urgency in starting such platform, and we wanted to check with the public, with anyone else, that if they really think that it is urgent as well, you know. So we just I promoted it on, you know, regular, like friends, families, social media, but was totally open to public. And then after we revised our structure after that meeting, we also thought about how do we reach participants. And it was also a challenge because we don't like open calls, and we are critical of them in such an open platform. So we did something that's called open call for registration, not for application, which is really important. So this is interesting how, like, for me, this is like thinking of a new structure made us really go over all the challenges that we go through in our lives with institutions. And a lot of people, like maybe let's say 25, 27 people registered. Of course, we accepted all of them. We just told them to, you know, we invited all to our first meeting. And then slowly, people, you know, after you come to the first meeting, you realize, maybe it's not for me. So people start to, you know, go without you telling them yes or no. So this was also an organic way to form a group that continued with us in the first edition.
Yeah, so I remember the first meeting we did with everyone. So everyone we just set up an email on Gmail, no? It's called School of Intrusions. It's really easy also to start. You know, it's institutions make it seem as if it's a very complicated thing to start a program or a project. So we decided not to apply for funding, and yeah, we started a Gmail, and everyone sent in. I don't know. We wrote a couple of questions like. You know, why would you be interested? We thought about you know, good questions that you would like to answer. So I remember actually in my application to the European Graduate School, which I went to, one of the questions was like, what's your favorite book or your favorite author? And you're always excited to actually share about that. So this is one question that we had, I think maybe the only question. And then everyone, of course, was invited because we didn't want to make a selection. This is the problem with schools. This selection is one of the issues. So we just we cooked mjaddara, which is a very basic and one of the like ancient dishes, which is lentil and cracked wheat. And we met at Khalid Sakakini Cultural Center, where we felt this is the kind of institution that we felt closest to at the time. And everyone came together and shared about themselves and what they do. And this was the first meeting. And then we shared also a sketch for a program. But it was always explained that it's a sketch of a program. and that it is up for change, and that anyone can take the lead. So maybe this, in terms of what was one of the maybe the difficulties, is that this was not, maybe we were not taken very seriously at saying that, no, that anyone could really take the lead on the different meetings. So we set up a meeting, and it was once every week or 2 weeks, I can't remember anymore, and we would set a place in the city, and we would set a text, and those two could coincide. I think we made a sketch for 6 meetings, and we invited the participants to then suggest and make the program together. And so one of the spaces, for example, where we met was here in the center of the city. And this is called the Lion Square, and it has an interesting history in the city of Ramallah. And this is a place where we all pass every day, because, you know, Ramallah is a very small city of 250,000 people, and it's very much, you know, when Noor was saying it's this particular moment, historical moment in Palestine, it's Ramallah is seen like a kind of a post-colony in a colony. This is what historian Shara Domani, how he defines it, like a post-colony inside a colony. So you have to think of it actually as a prison. And actually in prisons, we have a really interesting history of schools in prisons, in Israeli prisons, where Palestinian political prisoners spend 20 to 30 years as detainees, and actually have made their own schools and curriculums together. So maybe it's also good to almost think about it in this way, because it is a prison. I mean, in the West Bank, Palestinian populations live inside small prisons and cantons, like in South Africa. So we are always in the city as inhabitants. So one of the things that we wanted to do is, because you are always in the city, inside the prison, you kind of don't see it. You stop paying attention to it. So we started meeting at either a very known monuments, everyday monuments to us, or spaces that we always pass by, but we never go in, like the cemetery. So you mentioned, Özge, that we met in a cemetery. So we met, so one example is this Lions Monument, which has changed over the years many times through different periods of time. And we read a text by Adaniya Shibli about it. And we walked to a place. We always try to find places to sit and discuss, have a discussion where we don't have to pay any money. So no cafes, no, and of course we started noticing how scarce these spaces are. But yeah, we would walk around the city and then find a place to sit and have a discussion. But then, you know, especially like that day that where we went to this monument and walked around afterwards, we started noticing smaller monuments. So kind of more popular monuments, and started to speak about it. So it was really amazing how, through being in space, and like not only discussing the text but I think these are basic things that we know, but we really, once you experience them, you really find out how it does change the narrative. Because we went to see this monument, on our way back, we started noticing smaller monuments, and this really moved the discussion into a completely other space, speaking about popular monuments and more national monuments. Yeah, so this maybe I move the mic back to Noor, or back to you, Özge. I'll throw it, and whoever catches it first.
I'll take it. Because Lara, thanks so much for sharing that, because I understand that the seminars or the discussions, they immediately address the city and the specific political context in which you live. And the subjects that you talk about with the participants they are driven by participants themselves. So I'm wondering how you had to, or what you had to reconfigure when you were hosted in Athens, in Greece, in a place that you didn't live before. Maybe you did. Maybe you can also speak a little bit about what worked and what didn't work in your experience when this model was hosted by another city.
Sure. Maybe it's also good to mention that we were always interested in like knowledge, that what kind of knowledge is there in every site, you know? So we were always questioning where is knowledge produced, how it is produced, and how can we be in a dialogue with the site itself? So all the sites we will choose, they had certain urgency, and we will always relate to them in a way. So this is important. It's also, before Athens, is maybe good to mention like so we finished the first edition right when Corona hit, early March. And for us, we're really a new platform. So with Corona, you know, we could not start a second edition until you know, months after, when, you know, after the first lockdown, things opened up, and we tried to start the second edition. And I remember being there with participants, and then every time someone is positive, you know, so the Corona thing was really major. I mean, we started 2019, and, you know, these are 2 years of Corona somehow. So we had to, at certain point, I was even positive. So we could not meet physically. And this is our main challenge, I think, that that the physical meetings were not possible because of lockdowns and, you know, the challenge of movement. And this is where we really thought, okay, just to continue the discussions and the research topics, let's meet on Zoom. And I think this, I would start with this, that I think School of Intrusions meant to be physical insights in spaces, and it just, there's another kind of knowledge that is produced. Zoom helped us to continue the rhythm and to, you know, point, like, you know, be together at least once a week on Zoom, but, you know, it's not the same. So I would say this is the first challenge. And I think also the Athena edition, it came out after a long conversation with the institution in Athens, and I was a fellow there before, and we continued a long conversation of what does it mean, does it work or not, you know, and they were open and really, like, they were supporting a project rather than giving rules. And this is something we agreed on. They were generous in that. And with all the members of the Intrusions, we thought it's an experiment, and let's see if it works or not. What does it mean to be outside of our locality, which we are really militant about, let's say. And with Athena, we scheduled the same thing. Like, so we had also like local participants from there, that the plan is for them to visit Palestine in the fall. So this group of people, of course, we organized the whole 10 days also based on sites and based on collaborations between Palestinians and Greeks. And I think what worked there was, there is a familiarity in Athens, really close somehow, and the whole economical and issues and the alternative economical places that are starting. So we also try to focus on that. But one of the challenges, I would say, is the language, because in Palestine, we also like make sure to speak in Arabic and read mostly in Arabic when we can. And when we move it outside, so English becomes the language again. So this was one. The other, I would say, the time. I think 1 week to 10 days is still short if we really need to intrude in a place. You know, it can be a longer research place period. But of course, money, other things will pop up. But maybe these two things. And of course, we asked ourselves, can we speak here or not? Like, what does it mean? So, but the presence of the locals also, they also led the sessions, and we were also following or suggesting exercises, and then they will suggest the reading, the site, what's urgent for them. So I think it worked somehow because we were in dialogue with locals there and not alone intruding in a city that we don't know very well. I don't know if this is clear.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really want to go back to how you think about these collaborations and partnerships or co-working models. But before that, I would like to go back to you, Ahmet, and ask you how the silent university has changed over the last 10 years. And maybe we can approach it by thinking about locality, now that Noor and Lara really spoke about what was happening in Ramallah, how Ramallah was informing the methods and the format, and how certain things had to change when they were hosted in a different place. And you've been active in so many different countries, so it would be amazing to hear from you about how they've been shaping the silent university and its participants as well.
Yeah, thank you, Özge. Yeah, there are many different ways to explain this 10 years journey. I'll try to find another unique one now in this case. Okay, well, I was listening Lara and Noor referring few things, and I see there is one question about that too, so I will start with that. It's about, the open call thing and urgency. So these are linked to each other. When there is an urgency, you don't really do an open call, like, hey, whoever is more urgent, whoever is more in need to get involved, steps forward, So the thing is, we also started like that. That was absolute, principle. Even though it was harder in the beginning, because I was in a residency program. Silent University idea came in within a 1-year period of a residency program in London, and I was asked to do a community project in an environment that I hardly arrived myself, hardly got a permit to go there. And so I knew I was not going to be there long term. I was like limited to that 1-year period. I was in and out of London. And I knew also the idea of silent university after my observations in London. I realized there is no organization. There were so many organizations focusing on different age group, different backgrounds, different, like all these categories that were there. And they were doing a great job, all these NGO organizations and everything, like in London at the time. This was pre-Brexit times, way before, but migration to London, to UK, was harder than other European cities. So it was already a lot more difficult. It was already a lot longer. So Sweden depends if you're doing political asylum, asking for that, and it could, when you get like Amnesty International supporting your case and all this stuff, you can get in 3 years even Swedish citizenship, while in UK it was up to 20 years. So waiting depends on the cases. So people would arrive to UK, they would force to apply for asylum. And the other option would be remaining underground, like really for also security was always there. So we cannot really just like start with focusing on the curriculum and, all this like, all this like administrative stuff that is normally linked to an education platform. So we start with the urgency and who would like to be part of it and potentially in the future take over. Because this takeover part was part of it. So you kind of have to destroy the hierarchy in there in order for someone to be able to have a chance to take over. So when somebody gets comfortable, usually they keep the position when they get comfortable. In every institution, we have this problem. You know, there was all these things about like, okay, securing all these precarious positions that, you know, working from outside, being a freelancer and all this, like until you get this like permanent contract. A lot of welfare states examples in this kind of societies that once somebody gets this contract, it's hard to fire that person, even though they don't do any contribution anymore. And this also happens in academies all the time. That's why we have terrible academies all around the world, full of people who hate students, who hate young people, who hate young artists, because they are there, they see it as a kind of like lifetime income source. And maybe they were enthusiastic in the beginning, you know, for a couple of years, for some years, and then they lose this enthusiasm. But then what happens to the newly arrived people there? You know, they apply these universities, they pay so much fees in some countries to those universities in order to encounter with a professor who has no enthusiasm, who has no professional activity outside of the academy or even acknowledgement and so on. So as an independent, you know, creative person. So going back to Silent University, I thought these are not our problem. We have other problems. Or problems like, okay, all lecturers, I thought there's no organization focusing on that. So our lecturers, they can first start focusing on their lecture if they are interested to claim this platform for, like, you know, for their self-empowerment, not us helping them. I remove the words like workshop, help, actively. It's very hard to remove those from the art world because art worlds rely on temporality, symbolism, and, you know, there's not like long-term engagements. Like everything is kind of like on the surface. So when you want to go a little bit further than that, those words are kind of shielding to do something more effective, to respond to need and urgency and all this. So now we can see, you know, whenever war comes closer to another country, they realize, oh, it's around the corner, then now it's our urgency. But this urgency is always there in different places. Sometimes it's really stretched to the time. So it's not like invented overnight. So the ability, the capacity is to see that urgency is already being there and responding to it. So in UK, I saw, okay, before Brexit, we focus on that, and it became later all the Europeans based in UK had the same problem. But when we started, it was non-Europeans facing the same problems, and they were like in the position to help. So it was really this thing that became like very efficient for like education system that is going down towards the American system that is already down. And UK was taking that as an example. Pre-Brexit already, you know, introduced institution fees after 1998 and all this stuff. Imagine people who don't have documents have no chance, even, you know, if they have high qualification to teach from their country with the education they had, you know, in their own levels. They will never have chance unless they restudy everything for another 20 years to become a doctor again, become a lawyer again. So this we skipped. We skipped right away. So immediately within the end of first year, Silent University started functioning. The function was like really the direct, immediate recognition of everyone involved. If they were passionate enough, they would not just come to the first meeting, not just for the lunch, you know, free lunch or maybe free transportation, but they would continue and start claiming it. They saw it. It was difficult in the beginning because they thought, I am the initiator, so I need to first initiate the first step and then they will take over the rest. And this was already good enough motivation, but this is the failure also. The real motivation is that they don't all look at me as the initiator who needs to initiate the next step. You know, at some point it's like, yeah, this thing is working, this thing is needed, and we can run it ourselves. And Ahmed can be our guest. So this happened in some of the branches, and some, it was hard in the beginning. In London, I turned 1 year adventure into 3 years because of some of the institutions, they wanted to extend their involvement, like the Delfina Foundation, and then some other institutions jumped in, some couldn't continue at the time. Like they didn't know how to continue. They wanted, but they didn't know how to. They were not flexible enough to adjust themselves. But then Showroom jumped in, you know, for administrative reasons, for other reasons, space, hosting, and all these things. And we had scholars from Oxford University jumped in to organize. And I was always active in the beginning. I was trying to withdraw. I mean, I didn't have at some point a visa to go back to UK, and Silent University was still running. So I got my visa through another alternative school, Open School East at the time. That was also artist and curator initiated school. They got me a 2 years visa. Not the South Bank Gallery at the time couldn't get me a visa as a big institution because they were afraid to invite me on the ground of a different visa. So they were afraid to lose their license. I was in a group show there, British art show, but I couldn't go there with a business visitor visa at the time, pre-Brexit times. They said, this is illegal to invite me. I need a work permit to go show up at an opening. But instead, another alternative school invited me a symposium. They got me this letter. I got again long-term visa to go there and to be able to continue Silent University. So this was like institutional mentality. You know, the larger institutions had hard time, and I told them at the time, you have to negotiate with your government. It's not my problem, it's your problem. You need to talk to government. You need to make sure that you can remain international. Otherwise, you can't be international anymore. So this was the UK situation. And by the end of the 3 years, all our participants, they were, you know, undocumented mostly, and they were also like, we couldn't share some of their faces and names. You know, it was too dangerous. But we wanted to honor everyone. They all got permits, and two of them got even citizenship in the UK. At the moment, I remember I didn't even have visa to go there. So it was very interesting that this involvement happened. And meanwhile, we started slowly other cities, which I didn't want to rush. First 5 years, I didn't want to go even to the second place, but there was a lot of demand and promise, and those promises were real promise that they could run these other branches longer than 1 or 2 years, you know, because I didn't want to have the same story. I wanted and imagining already like this thing, if we actually do it properly, it can only function after 5 years start. We can start talking about it, you know, because I need to be able to talk about it that when I become a guest, when they take over and they start running it and they invite me as a guest, you know, this whole thing needs to be working to be able to talk about Silent University modality. And it happens like in Mülheim in Germany, in Stockholm in Sweden, this happened that our first lecturers slowly became coordinators and co-coordinators, and directors changed, first coordinators left, but they took over, new directors came in, they put in new budgets, they put in, you know, like yearly budgets and space, and they have their own space even in Mülheim, which they did so many collaborations. So it's incredible, like they even like translate every live event into multiple languages. Leaflets are in multiple languages, so nobody can do this. And in like they don't, because administration in bigger institutions are harder to be able to adjust, even involving one more language in it, you know. So we operated with average 5 to 6 languages, so in every event. How can you even afford that without having people's trust, without having people's authority? So open call was never open call for us, would never work for us. And for me also, it never works as an artist. I don't apply open calls. I think it's not responding to the idea of urgency. I would rather give my space to someone else who has more in urgent need. So if I'm going to go into this very competition-based idea of education, basically jumping over somebody who is very skilled. So I try to make myself more skilled to jump over that person in a competition to take over somebody else's place. This doesn't work for me, you know. Like for me, it's like we always empower each other or ourselves and in collaboration, and we could achieve bigger things. So this is how also Silent University works, you know, in terms of modality. And the energy in the urgency is still there. That's why it never ended. So not only the continuity, there's always new interest, and some can happen, some cannot, because of different reasons, you know. And like in Amman, it was mainly security reason. We couldn't continue. Immediately undercover police started ended up in our meetings, and that put too much danger on the lecturers. You know, we didn't want to put anyone in danger. So they realized locally this was not going to work there. It was too difficult, too complicated, unless we come up with another idea. So in Athens was the same. Security was again a big issue. But as I said, if you continue long enough, same people can start showing their faces, sharing their names. It's very important. So we did individual approaches to everyone. And then when you have within the community, local community, one trusted person always brings other 20. So it's always this like, okay, for some strange reason, they trusted me in the beginning and they still sometimes trust me, even though I'm not local most of the time. But they can, like, everyone is very smart, like they know, like, you know, in those kind of places, like in Palestine, they know very well that, you know, there's all these like NGO organizations showing up with some temporary budgets, you know, they know these people will disappear in 6 months. So do we want to waste our time with this 3 months, 6 months workshop project things, or how can we actually create sustainable structures in an unsustainable place? So this is a productive struggle concept. So productive struggle is like everyday life struggle, you know. So this kind of institutions adjusts, they are flexible enough to adjust themselves to the crisis, to the urgency, in order to maintain and sustain better than bigger institutions that they can't, you know. So I don't see those as alternative to the other universities. I think now the other universities are alternative to us. You know, they try to actually copy this kind of platforms. They try to reach out. I mean, we were trying to, Australian government tried to reach us, you know, like how can we like work with like newly arrival people? Yeah, they try to ask us. So because it's not about the scale. If you go too big scale, you can get bigger budgets and all this. We were never after that. It was like every individual have like very unique needs, but then it's responding to this collective crisis situation. So we need to be able to be sensitive and you know, paying attention to what every single individual's need. And this one individual can change and can have the platform run a lot longer than initiators' energy or the first institution's energy. So I think it's very important that it keeps bringing people like that on the basis of trust, and they believe in it and they see concrete outcomes, you know, getting permits, getting, you know, like this life thing, like the everyday life gets easier in terms of bureaucracy and administration. So it's not only about the knowledge production, it's also about that, yes, again, reclaiming public space. If you work with an institution, they need to escort people into the building. We don't care how big is that museum or organization, they are out. So we want to work with institution, no matter what scale. We don't want people to be escorted in and out because they don't have documents. They need to take our cards as official as other cards, other ID cards, you know, and then it starts happening. And they need to be able to pay people without being able to write invoices. They need to come up with ideas how to pay people who actually can't have a bank account or can't have a mail, like postal address. You know, how can you actually immediately recognize someone who don't have those basic things, and those basic things are taken away? They are actually human rights taken away on purpose. It's a systematic, exclusion of people, and it is not only possible to get rid of that with classic integration politics. We are not doing it on the basis of assimilating people, but rather like really celebrating what kind of knowledge they have.
Thanks so much for that, Ahmet. I really want to pick up on the idea of collaborations and partnerships with art institutions and cultural institutions. But before I ask my question, I want to tell the audience members, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A box in Zoom, and hopefully we'll get to your questions again. So back to the collaborations and partnerships with art institutions and cultural institutions. I mean, all of you mentioned that, you know, you have these temporary engagements as teachers, as educators in some of these schools, and for your own projects, you also think about how you are collaborating, how you are engaging with cultural institutions. And I want us to speak a little bit more about that. And to do that, I also want to go back to the names of the schools, right? On the one hand, we have the idea of intrusion. So, you know, it's a sense of immediate intervention, maybe a temporary intervention, or maybe it's that there's a sense of transgression almost. So I'll want to start with you, Lara and Noor, and I really want to think about how the term that you use in the name of the school, how does it inform the way that you work with art institutions?
بدك تبلشي نور؟
No, go. I continue.
Okay. So I mean, from this question to go back to something that Ahmed said in relation to the question in the Q&A about open calls. I think Ahmed, you said it really nicely, this whole problematic of competition. And I think when it comes to the institution and also being in particular contexts and funding and NGOs, right? I mean, you have this from open calls, the institution gives you the impression that you have this kind of open opportunity, this ideal of the open opportunity, right? But it is a mechanism that is very much tied to funding and selection and precisely as Ahmed was saying, competition. And so to reject an open call or to invite everyone who is wanting or who needs has the urgency to be involved or that is already there, right? We speak about ecosystems a lot, no, with AAA and with the work with Documenta and an ecosystem is already there as well, right? It's a community that already exists and that does things together without this kind of organized structure of the institution. But this whole problematic of competition, I think, comes especially in terms of when you speak about a school, right? I think like also taking the school as instead of a structure, but as a mechanism to do exactly the opposite in terms of art education for and with artists, right? Because, you know, the issue with us in the art world is that we are put into positions of competition. The open call is the epitome of this competition. We're all put into these situations of competition with each other, but the school keeps it open. So the context of the school where everyone is learning together and everything is still open and everyone is thinking together, right, I think is a tool, no? Like how can one use it as a tool to also subvert or try something else? So I'd say for example, in our discussions with everyone in School of Intrusions, there was always discussion whether each would do a project or not. And we kept postponing that, we kept not working. And it was actually great because it always kept it open, this openness. And if we had got the funding, for example, we would have had to do it, right? Because of you know, certain caveats that come with the funding. So this kept it open, kept it also collective, kept it from a kind of competition coming in, which I think is really important. So I wanted to say this, and then towards intrusions. I mean, I think it is very very direct in the sense that we actually would sometimes go into institutions, which are these big kind of NGOs, and sit there and work there together as intruders, without asking permission, without telling anyone, so we treated everywhere as if it were a commons, because that's how it should be. It belonged to us, and you know, although in many cases we wouldn't have been either allowed or we would have had to take a permission. So yeah, it's in Arabic, it's Madrasat al-Dukhala, so it's School of Intruders actually, which yeah, literally would mean that we would intrude on private and public, you know, spaces and see what happens as well.
I'll just jump in right now because there's a follow-up question from Disarm and Design. So I'll just read it out loud. They're saying, what I'm curious about is the relationship between these non-institutionalized learning platforms and institutionalized schools. In an earlier talk, Noor and Lara mentioned that they were able to set up the School of Intrusions, also because they have teaching positions in regular schools. So I wonder how to deal and shape the institutional relations to make other things possible. And if we can do it without institutions, or if we have to shape particular kind of relations and conditions. Noor, would you be able to, would you like to take this?
Sure. I also think it continues what Lara was saying. So I think from the beginning, our refusal to like waiting, to wait for funding, or refusal to be institutionally affiliated with any, with any institution, this is already, it shaped the structure. And I think in an earlier talk, I remember we were both teaching, and I mean, like, we're sustaining our rents in some way, but I mean, now we're both not teaching, but, working in other jobs. So I think we also like, how to say, like, we don't depend on funding to create an informal kind of education, but we rather take it as all of it as a form of intervention, like this program intervening also in our lives in a way. And this is, I think, what we meant then, that it's not, taken off from all your life to do this program for 6 months and then you finish and then you go back to reality, but rather to really integrate it into our actual life situations. And it's important to mention that all the sessions were after working hours. Everyone was invited, not only artists, any cultural producer, cultural worker, anyone interested. As I said, my father was there. So this structurally was important to think between funding and these elements as well. And with our relationship with institutions, I think I see it as a form of negotiation and improvisation. As Lara mentioned before, the sites would include sometimes cultural institutions. And as Lara mentioned before, we started with Khalil Sakakini Culture Center, but I remember that the employees of the Sakakini Center, they intruded with a text. They led the session because we were in their space and the employees were in the session, and we were reading a text about culture and revolution. And we intruded in another culture institution, and we were moved from the library to the cafe because we cannot sit there. So it goes into these kinds of negotiations and real intruding, and I think we believe that this can make a little change in the social structure or surface that these institutions are carrying. But to be back, to get back to my, like, when I was teaching, I would use similar methodologies with my students. I would invite them to join. So I would try to at least to influence the students that I'm with, with these methodologies at least. So.
Thank you, Noor. There's a very quick follow-up question from Urok Shirhan, who's asking, Lara, could you repeat the name of the school in Arabic?
مدرسة الدخلاء.
Perfect. Sure, thank you so much. Ahmet, I would like to continue with you. The question that I had in mind actually resonates with a new question that just appeared in the Q&A box. So I'll just start and then go to that question. Because again, thinking about the titles, the title of the initiative, the Silent University. So the immediate association in my mind is something less visible, something not immediately visible, maybe parasitic, but also the term university, you know, it already refers to an established institutional model. So that's why I'd like to think about the silent university like a para-institution, right? I mean, there's an institutional framework, but you don't abide by institutional limitations. And I believe this is how you also engage with institutional partners, right? You become a host by an institution, and you also ask for, let's say, not only 3 months, 4 months, but longer engagements. And this leads me to the question that's raised in the Q&A box. And the question is, Ahmet, you began to speak about sustainability, and it will be great to hear you say more about sustaining long-term collaborations and programs, maybe with the specificity of the institutional partnerships. Because I'm sure most of them that you collaborated 10 years ago, they're also not there anymore, right, Ahmet?
Yeah, a lot is changing in 10 years. So yeah, there was, like, when we started, there was a lot of like artist-run schools at the time. Some of them maybe still around, some of them not. Maybe they lasted, they were designed to be lasted 3 to 5 years. So we don't want to become a marginalized institution, first of all. Like, you know, we are parasitic or para-institution in collaboration with other institutions that are there, that are recognized. And we are also recognized right away because we take care a lot about institutional identity in the beginning. So it was a little bit like lame in the beginning for some people who, you know, who comes from more rather leftist activist background, working in institutions, kept the same kind of aesthetics for so many years, and then looking at us like, oh, we have this, like, you know, official institute, university title and the logo and color code and, you know, in our publications, in our space. They were like, who needs that? You know, the ones who are doing this activism, working with the communities, this could be from the theater world, this could be from the art world. No one really got, like, in the beginning, why do we need this kind of institutional identity? You know, the graphic design. Like now I'm teaching, for instance, a little bit also, I started teaching at the design department in Amsterdam at Sandberg University, one of my teaching engagements. I teach at the sculpture department, I teach at the design department, I talk to architecture students. Not that I know those fields, but each field has a role. So what we started at Science University in the beginning, we had this institutional identity, and I didn't say just yes to an institution, let's start with you guys. I said, you need to go walk around, make your own research. If you're an art museum, you need to find an NGO organization, community organization, and you need to find an academic organization and come back. You can take a year, come back, finding these other organizations, and you guys are forced to collaborate with each other in a different way. Not like making a workshop with one community organization from the neighborhood, and not like that, in an equal way, in a really collaborative way that every institution bring other kind of facility. Yes, if you also teach, like in, like I'm acting as a teacher in art schools or other schools besides Silent University involvement, there are other things that it could be combined and everything. We can combine things as artists, but also sometimes it's even better to be anonymous. So as long as I'm honest with it, it works. The moment I stop being honest, it will fail. Sustainability comes with that. It's not just me, but everyone else involved has to work with the same principle. So every other member of Silent University who have had so much experience over the years have the same amount of, you know, priority in that sense when it comes to talking about it. You know, they could go and represent Silent University. It's not just me. So we are many. And each one of us needs to behave with this principle. There was 2 attempts to make Silent University without letting us know, or trying to get in touch with us and learn how we do it, and they could just get some like huge government money or from somewhere, you know, like European capital money or something, and they would just like disappear after 2 years. They always had more money than us, but they were not honest. So when you're not honest, when you don't really get the principles, that's why we wrote them down like in posters and everywhere. We wrote them down. You need those principles. Without those principles, you can have space, you can have money, you can temporarily bring people, telling them not the truth, you know, because you don't want to get engaged with them like longer than a couple of months, a workshop or whatever, because they will just look back to you and they will say, why did I get involved with this thing that was like really basically instrumentalizing me? So if you instrumentalize anyone, it becomes clear the moment you abandon them. So this kind of thing is not about abandoning. When somebody doesn't need it anymore, they become consultants. Then they are useful for the newcomers. So it's always good, like everybody's experience is important, but they should not overclaim ownership, you know, authorship of entire thing. The moment someone is trying to do that, naturally they are out. So we didn't register Silent University, we didn't patent it. Those people were able to just like manipulate our logo or name, they were able to do those things, but they were not respected. They were not part of our international community. They were not part of, you know, they could just temporarily do that. That's why continuity and sustainability comes with the principles and urgency and the need, and everyone respecting the ones who are more in need at that moment for self-empowerment, not pretend that we are helping somebody else, you know, situation, like really treating everyone literally basically gets paid the same since the beginning. I was in this more privileged position. I could have get myself paid more. You know, I could just get paid even for supervising, you know, or even distributing the brand, like some museum stands, like Guggenheim, like franchising. Okay, we give the brand for some millions, you know, just for the brand. Like we know the surplus of, that's why the design, the institutional identity is very important. And this could be used for profit, but this could be also used as a shield to protect the principles. So we always kept it that way. We didn't collaborate with people who want to use it for profit, for that moment, for themselves, you know, pretending they're helping this disadvantaged communities, but they were just doing it for themselves. We stayed away from those. And even if they were temporarily able to do that, they were out themselves. We didn't have to do anything. We didn't have to go to court. We didn't have to, you know, do anything about it. They were just naturally out very short amount of time out. Yeah.
Thank you, Ahmet. And one of our participants picked up on the idea of transparency. So I'm going to read that question that's addressed to Lara and Noor. But I also wanted to ask all of you if you have any questions for each other, because I think we'll be wrapping up in about 5 minutes. So maybe we can also go to that after this question. So the question is, comes from an anonymous attendee. How transparent are you with institutional partners about the desire to intrude or the desire to intervene? Who would like to take it? Lara and Noor?
Yeah, I would simply say not very transparent. I mean, because, you know, why take away the fun and be transparent? I mean, just to say that it was, you know, with some that maybe we felt closer to, it was about, actually, it was a very nice way to also find out about this agility, right, and participation, and how some institutions are more self-reflective and self-conscious of themselves, and so and act as individuals, because we have this issue in I mean, as everywhere else, but everywhere, everyone in Palestine works in an NGO, or a certain class maybe of people. So you have this double, so everyone is affiliated with an institution of some sort. But it is very important to also see yourself as an individual, because there was a historical shift where, you know, activists during the 80s, after the Oslo Accords, became directors and coordinators at NGOs, at institutions, and were apoliticized, and yeah, it's a long story. But then this is a really important question about how there is a kind of self-awareness, how to always negotiate these different roles that people have in certain institutions, so it was really so whether to be transparent or not maybe is not the question. It's how the institution would actually respond to this intrusion, you know, whether they would be agile and see themselves as a participant as well, right? Or whether they would see themselves as this as a private space where you need permission and approval and to do what you want to do. So yeah, it was always the negotiation and the experience was always very, very interesting for all of us. I think the institution as well as the School of Intrusions in that sense. So not to be transparent was very productive in a way. Yeah.
I agree. I think it's more about testing this social services rather than transparent or not. And I mean, every situation is different, and it's really not only about institutions, because as we mentioned before, the site is important, and it's, you know, we did not only intrude in cultural institutions, but it's the same negotiation also. Like when we go to the cemetery and the guard tell us like, you cannot enter, but this same guard, after like we talk to him, he becomes the leader of our session for 2 hours, telling us stories that we will never know without this knowledge that this person has, being in that site for too many years. So it's the same kind of negotiations in sites, and really testing what works, what doesn't work, why not, you know. And institutions is the same. So we will enter and then see, and if we hold a session in the cafe of the institution, which is public, but we are reading about, you know, institutional struggles in Palestine, then we find our own relations. And if a friend comes by to the cafe, they can also join the discussion. So it's also, I would say, testing more than transparent or not. And I agree, like, it's not about transparency in these situations. It's more really like intruding without specific times, but, you know, just being there.
Thank you for that, Noor. There is one last question that I would like to read, if that's okay with you. We might be over time for a couple of minutes. May I do that? We have a question by Jack Segbars, and I'll just read it out loud. My question concerns the critique voiced by Ahmet about working relations and tenure in production that hamper to address urgent situations and people in crisis and need. The working model that was proposed, more flexibility, also resonates strongly with neoliberal policies of disbanding social arrangements, leading to the job insecurity and precarity. How would such a new model or direction for differ from neoliberal models? How can these proposals for a new working modality inform a model for a new economy and become more structural? Is the dialogue between independent, peri-institutional, and institutional platforms key here? I think that's quite an amazing question to wrap up with as well. Ahmet, would you like to go first?
I mean, this is a big question to answer, but now we are actually officially entering over time. So maybe
where to start?
An answer of 1,000 pages. But I could briefly say that the reason Silent University exists now 10 years, like, you know, it's not that I'm just like proud about it or something. It's about that we keep failing. What keeps failing? So that's maybe different than the neoliberal model. It's not proposing this is like an alternative model for future, like this is business, we should all make it based on precarity and all this stuff. But it's actually transforming existing institutions. Either maybe they are transparent sometimes fully, maybe they are not able to do that. We do understand that some institutions cannot go fully transparent, but if they want to work with us, they need to transform themselves. And the moment they transform themselves, that means they become more transparent. In this process, there are heavy negotiations. Heavy negotiations are easier for me to do it for Silent University rather than for myself as a freelancer, precarious person who is teaching in many different universities, but that doesn't change my position. I'm still in same precarity, and the answer I get is always like, you know, this is the way it is. Everyone gets paid the same way. So that means that gets the same abuse. Why everyone is okay, why I'm not okay. So if you address it individually, it's a different thing. But I can talk about all kinds of, you know, like radical transformation when it is addressed collectively. If it is not seen as so it is better for me to negotiate silent university principles, or anyone involved with silent university negotiate them until the moment it's not needed. Until the moment existing institution, no matter what way and what kind of, you know, if it's a social welfare place, a country, or if it's a country that is more privatized or even under dictatorship, is this institution transformed enough? Does this have its own autonomy, whatever under what kind of regime, even, you know, in war times, is this institution can act, you know, with specific principles? And if this all start happening, which we could create in our own environment on micro scale, but really multiplied way, we can create, and we can just live in that like dream society. Basically in silent university, we have been living in that dream society that everything is translated to 5 different languages. You know, we don't have any administrative obstacle. Actually, we could pay anyone like without needing to wait for authorizations and things. Like we find ways to do it. That's why it exists. But as I said again, it's not about creating this marginal situation. It is needed until it is not needed. You know, it's not about self-celebration.
Thank you, Ahmet. Lara and Noor, would you like to share your thoughts as well? And then I think we'll have to wrap up.
Yeah, I mean,
it's a big one.
Yeah,
and with a bang.
I mean, yeah, I agree with Ahmed about it's needed as you know, until it's not needed, and so maybe the, you know, this question of how does it become structural is how it's to inverse it. How does the structural become more informal instead? So how do we keep on, you know, I mean, I guess with the silent university, because it's been already 10 years, no? 10 years, Ahmed. So this, that it proves it can be sustainable and flexible at the same time and still be informal. I mean, this is structural in a sense. I mean, this, so it's about how we think of what is structural and what is not. So to support, to build our own institutions. I think for us also, it's a question that I find here more in Europe now that I'm here for a couple of years, that there is no question, for example, in Palestine about the structural and the informal, because we don't have trust in governmental structural institutions, or because they are not present, then the informal becomes the only way. The only way is that we make them, right? We make these informal structures, and also that it is something that is difficult, but it's doable, and that could be the structural. Yeah, I don't know if Noor wants to add.
No, I agree with what you said.
Okay, so I think this is a moment for me to jump in again. I really wanted to thank all of you. I personally keep learning from all of you and all the school and educational models that you've been working on. And I really want to thank the participants who asked questions as well. And I really hope that we can continue this conversation. Yeah, so much to follow up with, but thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you soon.
See you soon. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.